So let's carry on reading on page 17, and the Ghost of Christmas Past is taking Scrooge to another memory. He's just said that, let us see another Christmas. You can see that there. Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrunk, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked laths were shown instead. But how all of this was brought about, and Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct, for everything had happened so that there he was, alone again, when all the other boys had gone home from the jolly holidays. So they're still in the schoolroom. This is still another schoolroom, but the place is becoming even more dilapidated, even more damaged, and Scrooge, the boy Scrooge, has grown a bit bigger. Okay, so he's a little bit older, but he's yet again at home, at school on his own. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in, and put her arms around his neck, and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear, dear brother. I have come to bring you home, dear brother, said the child, clapping her tiny hands, and bending down to laugh. To bring you home, home, home. Home, little Fan, returned the boy. Yes, said the child, brimful of glee. Home for good and all, home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be that home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home, and he said yes you should, and sent me in a coach to bring you, and you're to be a man, said the child, opening her eyes, and are never to come back here, but first we're to be together all the Christmas long, and have the merriest time in the world. So let's just pick up on some of those bits. We're to be together all the Christmas long. So we've got this idea of Christmas and togetherness. And she says, and have the merriest time, not just a merry time, but the merriest. When you say something is the most something, or the worst something, or the best something, you say, we describe it as a superlative. So the tallest, the biggest, the wildest, this kind of EST at the end, telling us it's the most it could be. So again, all of this is telling us, or sort of reinforcing the kind of positivity of Christmas time. And there's a real emphasis on home, isn't there here? Home, 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 home. So the repetition here about the importance of family. But also this could be about the importance of belonging. Because Scrooge, as he alienates himself from his family, as he kind of cuts himself off from everybody, feels like he doesn't belong anywhere. And there's also, again, this reminder of the fact that this is what happened to Dickens, that he was, not allowed to sort of come home and go back to school and be with his family. He had to work. So if we note somewhere with this idea of home, we can put reminds us that Dickens was sent away to live with that family friend, remember? To live elsewhere and work whilst the family were all in debtor's prison. So Dickens himself knew the pain of being cut off from his family. And we also might want to just draw attention to the description of Fan. She's a little girl. She comes darting in with a sense of excited, kissing him, and dear, dear brother. So again, we've got this emphasis on kind of loving relationships. You know, she's almost kind of excitable in the joy that she's showing to him. So this is where we got to. You are quite a woman, little Fan, exclaimed the boy. She clapped her hands and laughed and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. So again, she's hugging, she's clapping her hands, she's laughing. There's a real sense of joy here, which we certainly wouldn't have associated with Scrooge before. Then she began to drag him in her childish eagerness towards the door, and he, nothing loth to go, accompanied her. A terrible voice in the hall cried, "Bring down Master Scrooge's box there!" and in the hall appeared the schoolmaster himself, who glared on Master Scrooge with a ferocious condescension, and threw him into a dreadful state of mind by shaking hands with him. So Scrooge's obviously got a real fear of him. Just this guy shaking his hand, throws him into a dreadful state of mind. He then conveyed him and his sister into the veriest old well of a shivering best parlour that was ever seen, where the maps upon the wall and the celestial and terrestrial globes in the windows were waxy with cold. Here he produced a decanter of curious light wine and a block of curiously heavy cake, and administered instalments of those dainties to the young people at the same time, sending out a meagre servant to offer a glass of something to the post-boy, who answered that he thanked the gentleman, but it was the same tap as he had tasted before, he had rather not. Master Scrooge's trunk being by this time tied on the top of the chaise, the children bade the schoolmaster good-bye right willingly, and getting into it, drove gaily down the garden sweep, the quick wheels dashing the hoarfrost and snow from off the dark leaves of the evergreens like spray. So there we see the children leaving the school finally. So let's turn over to page 18. And now we see the ghost and the older Scrooge reflecting on what they've seen. "Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered," said the ghost, "but she had a large heart." "So she had," cried Scrooge. "You're right. I will not gainsay it, Spirit, God forbid." "She died a woman," said the ghost, "and had, as I think, children." "One child," Scrooge returned. "True," said the ghost. "Your nephew." Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind, and answered briefly, "Yes." So again, this kind of seems uneasy is showing again this kind of regret in Scrooge. So the ghost is showing things to Scrooge, which is changing him. Okay, draw a line under here because we're going to get a new memory. All right, still in the past, but now Scrooge is going to take him somewhere else. So you can, I shouldn't have moved it down yet, write on the top of your page, Fezziwig. Okay, because that's who we're going to see next. Although they had but that moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city, where shadowy passengers passed and repassed, where shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way, and all the strife and tumult of a real city were. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here too it was Christmas time again, but it was evening and the streets were lighted up. So each memory that the Ghost of Christmas Past is taking Scrooge to is a memory from his past, but also from Christmas in his past. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. "Know it?" said Scrooge. "Was I apprenticed here?" So this is when he was first starting to work. They went in, at sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller he must have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried in great excitement, "Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig alive again!" Now remember, Fezziwig is his boss. But straight away we can see it almost like a sense of love and admiration for this man. Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, "Yo-ho there, Ebenezer! Dick!" Scrooge's former self, now a grown young man, came briskly in, followed by his apprentice. "Dick Wilkins, to be sure," said Scrooge to the ghost. "Bless me, yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Poor Dick, dear, dear." Okay, let's just skip back and look at our first description of Fezziwig. And it says he laughed all over himself from his shoes to his organ of benevolence. And it really means from his head to his toe, essentially. His organ of benevolence could be his head or his heart. And we know if we're benevolent, then we're kind, giving, and generous. So you can be sort of generous in heart and in head, really, in thought and in heart. And so straight away we've got the fact that Fezziwig is a boss, but he's a very, very different boss to Scrooge. If you think about Scrooge's relationship with Bob Cratchit and compare them here. And jovial means happy, jolly, full of joy, joyful, in good spirits. So it's important that we remember these words to describe Fezziwig. Yo ho, my boys, said Fezziwig. No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up, cried old Fezziwig, with a sharp clap of his hands, before a man can say Jack Robinson. So straight away we see a very different character to Scrooge. So we can put that this is a contrast to Scrooge's relationship with Bob. So what Dickens here is he's kind of painting a picture of how Scrooge could be, reminding him of what sort of a boss he could be. He can still have his own business, he can still be rich, but he just needs to be a bit kinder. And let's look at the language here. Now you might say yo-ho almost makes him sound like Father Christmas. And he refers to them as my boys. My is a pronoun. It's almost like he feels like these boys belong to him. So he's got a sense that they are in his care, maybe that he wants to protect them, or even that he sees them as family. He feels a responsibility to these boys. And this is really important because this is what Dickens believed. He didn't believe that the government should help out poor people, but he believed that individuals should kind of act as benefactors. They should support and look after other people who were less fortunate themselves. And here we see Fezziwig being presented as someone who is wealthy and has responsibility, but is using that to do good and using that to look after the people within his care and extending that beyond his family to the people that he works for. And then he says, no more work tonight, Christmas Eve. So again, these short sentences put him in direct contrast with Scrooge, who really, really did not want to give Bob the day off at all. So we see him kind of holding up and venerating Christmas, really, celebrating it. You wouldn't believe how those two fellows went at it. They charged into the street with shutters. 1, 2, 3, had 'em up in their places. 4, 5, 6, barred 'em and pinned 'em. 7, 8, 9, and came back before you could have got to 12, panting like racehorses. So again, here they want to work for him. They're keen. Hilly-ho! Cried old Fezziwig, skipping down from the high desk with wonderful agility. Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Hilly-ho, Dick! Chirrup, Ebenezer! Clear away? There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off, as if it were dismissed from public life for evermore, and the floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright as a ballroom as you could desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book, and went up to the lofty desk, and made an orchestra of it, and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came 3 Mrs. Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable, Miss Fezziwigs. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. Now, we've got this constant, again, repetition of in came. And everyone joining into this party almost again sets up a direct contrast to earlier in stage 1. Let me see if I can just skim back and find it for you. Yeah, exactly here. So on page 2, nobody ever stopped him on the streets. No beggars, no man or woman. That's how they are with Scrooge. But with Fezziwig, everyone's coming in. In came, in came. So we could put that that's a direct contrast with nobody ever stopped him in the street. And that bit is on page 3. So everyone's joining in with Fezziwig, whereas with Scrooge, everyone avoided him. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In came the boy from over the way, who was suspected of not having board enough from his master, trying to hide himself behind the girl from next door but one, whom was proved to have had her ears pulled by her mistress. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couple at once, hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, new top couples starting off again as soon as they got there. All top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them out. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" and the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose. But scorning rest upon his reappearance, he instantly began again, and there were no dancers yet, as if the other fiddler had been carried home exhausted on a shutter, and he were a brand new man resolved to beat him out of sight or perish. So we've got the sense here that they're having a party. They're having a Christmas party. All right, so we've got celebration, joy, happiness, etc. And let's look at some of the things that are going on. Firstly, we've got that they're dancing. We've also got a fiddler, a violin player, so we've got music. And we've got him having a pot of porter, he's having a drink as well. So all the various ghosts are going to take us to lots of different Christmases, and you can describe each one of these as a vignette. This is a really great word for you to use. Okay, a vignette. It's a French word, vignette, and it basically means a little picture or a description. So what we're seeing is lots of little vignettes, lots of little images, snapshots, if you like. You could put snapshot if you want to help you remember it. Snapshots from Scrooge's past. And when we see all these ones at Christmas, we'll see things like dancing and music and drinking they keep coming back. And you should hopefully remember from before that when we have an image that keeps coming back, it's got a particular name. Can you remember it? It is motif. Okay, so we've got this motif of music, motifs of dancing and motifs of drinking, and we'll pick them out as we go on. There were more dances and there were forfeits and more dances, and there was cake and there was negus and there was a cold piece of roast and there was a great piece of cold boiled and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and boiled, when the fiddler, artful dog mind, the sort of man who knew business better than you or I, or could have told it to him, struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig, top couple too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them, 3 or 4 and 20 of partners, people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance and had no notion of walking. Okay, so again, we've then also got food. Is really important here. And they've got more dances and they've got forfeits. We've got people having a good time. And then it says people who would dance and had no notion of walking. And I think this is almost like a metaphor. People who would dance, this is people who get the most out of life. Okay, this is our optimists. And then people who just kind of walk through life. These are the ones who are maybe sort of the pessimists, who don't have anything to celebrate. And if we think about some of the characters we've met so far, we know that Bob Cratchit would be the one dancing. We know that Fred would be the one dancing, whereas Scrooge is the one who would not want to join in with any of the fun, or the current Scrooge anyway that we meet at the beginning of the story. But if they had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them, and so would Mrs. Fezziwig. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. If that's not high praise, tell me higher and I'll use it. A positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. So again, we've got this idea of light connected with Fezziwig, contrasting the darkness that we associate with Scrooge. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. So again, if we think about this simile here, Fezziwig is being described, like a moon. The moon is powerful. The moon is always present. And the moon kind of guides us. It's part of life. So this is a great simile to describe Fezziwig. And if we think about him in comparison to Scrooge, Scrooge does none of these things. You couldn't have predicted at any given time what would have become of them next. And when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone all through the dance, advance and retire, both hands to your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your place, Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs and come upon his feet again without a stagger. When the clock struck 11, the domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations on one either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 apprentices, they did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a countertop in the back shop. So just to bear in mind then that they actually live where they work. They sleep on the floor in the back shop, in part of the warehouse. During this whole time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene and with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost and became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon its head burnt very clear. A small matter, said the ghost, to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. So this is just a reminder that this small matter is the party, but it makes people so full of gratitude. Okay, so they are grateful. And what the ghost is saying here to Scrooge is, he can do small things. We're really talking about small acts of kindness. Can mean a lot. And this is part of Dickens's message. This is not just the ghost's message to Scrooge. I don't know why I've put that in there. This is not just the ghost's message to Scrooge. This is Dickens' message to the reader as well. That a small matter can make folks so full of gratitude. So this reminder for us to all show small acts of kindness, just like Fezziwig shows his employees. And then if we turn to the top of page 20, we see Scrooge's reaction to this. Small, echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the 2 apprentices, who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said, Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise? So here he's saying, look, Fezziwig spent a small amount of money, a few pounds of your mortal money. Is that so much that he deserves this praise? So Fezziwig, the two apprentices have been basically saying how much they love their boss, how great he is. And he's saying, he only spent a little bit of money, and this is how much you repay him. But then Scrooge remembers it, and he says, "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously like his former, so sounding like the apprentice, not his latter self. "It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, and in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to count them up. And what then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." Now, it's interesting some of the language that we've got here. If we think about that idea of semantic field, we've got, counting, and we've got things costing a fortune. So this is kind of the financial language or semantic field that we would normally associate with Scrooge, kind of counting the pennies. Don't know why I can't spell today. Counting the pennies, counting everything up, making sure it is worthwhile. And we've got this as well, sort of a few pounds of your mortal money. But really, what he's saying here is the value of money is spending it on others to make everyone happy. So he says, Fezziwig has the power to render us happy or unhappy. So this is a reminder that the bosses have power, but they also have kind of responsibility as well to their workers. So again, this is a lesson for employers here, really. To render us, that means to make us happy or unhappy. To make our service, our work for them, light or burdensome. That means if something's a burden, that means it's troublesome, it's hard work. A pleasure or a toil. That would go better with hard work there. So it's saying employers need to treat people right in order to make sure that it's a nice place for them to work. So that's kind of the message here. Employers have a responsibility to treat people well. And look after them. So he's saying that then the employers have a responsibility to treat their employees well and look after them. But Scrooge then goes on to say that his power lies in words and looks. So we're talking about just the kindnesses of words and looks in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. And what then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune. So again, we've got the idea of small things like words and looks can sort of add up and have value. They're important. The effect they can have on people. So really what we're seeing is that Scrooge is starting to realise the value of kind deeds. But he's talking about them as if they're like money, as if they're as important as money, but that the kind of little words and looks, the little small things that Fezziwig did for him all add up as if they cost a fortune. So we've got these little kindnesses bringing value and meaning to people. He felt the spirit glance and stopped. "What is the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing particular," said Scrooge. "Something, I think," the ghost insisted. "No," said Scrooge. "No. I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now. That's all." So again we can see Scrooge reflecting. Each one of these memories, each one of these vignettes, remember, is getting Scrooge to reflect and wish that he'd done something different. But he still doesn't yet realise that actually he can change. The former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick." This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom could see, but it produced an immediate effect. Again Scrooge saw himself. Okay, do you know what? We'll stop there because we're going to move on to another memory. It might be worth, just before you stop, I think this is probably worth highlighting. I should like to say a word or two to my clerk just now. That's all. Okay, so this idea that when he sees how he was with Fezziwig as a young person, he sort of is starting to realise what responsibility he has towards Bob. All right, we'll stop there because that's kind of all the Fezziwig bit.